Hello and welcome to Sunderland Talks. My name is Amanda Morley and joining me today is Dr. Paul Dresser, a senior lecturer in criminology here at the University of Sunderland. Paul's research interests include policing terrorism, extremism, surveillance and social control, counter-radicalisation and counter-terrorism. Today, Paul will be talking to us about PREVENT. PREVENT is a government counter-radicalisation policy. Hello, Paul.
Hello, Amanda.
You all right?
I'm very well, thank you. You?
I'm very well, thank you. So, Paul, we are discussing PREVENT today. Can you tell our listeners a bit more about PREVENT? What is it?
So, PREVENT essentially is a counter-radicalisation programme. It's operational within England and Wales. It's not operational in Northern Ireland. It sits within the government's contest strategy, which is a counter-terrorism strategy made up of what are referred as the 4 Ps. They are prevent, protect, pursue and prepare. Unlike the 3 Ps, which I'll briefly mention, PREVENT governs in what's called a non-criminal space, whereas pursue, protect and prepare govern in a criminal space, meaning that the people that engage or work with people within PREVENT, they have done absolutely nothing criminal. They are seen as vulnerable and or in need of protection. So PREVENT is essentially a community, or was a community-driven policy, which is now framed around safeguarding and through a protectionist agenda.
So you say PREVENT is a community policy. What do you mean by that? Do you mean it's not ran, or it's not run by the police force? Are we looking for volunteers within the community to ensure the PREVENT policy is ran in the UK and Northern Ireland? Is that where you're coming from?
Yep, so if we have a look at contest, protect, pursue and prepare, they're essentially police-owned elements of contest. PREVENT's different. It is government-owned, but it's not top-down in the sense that we might understand top-down control or surveillance. It is driven by, or essentially it's meant to be driven by communities working alongside professional practitioners and state officials as well, to identify at-risk individuals and support vulnerable individuals, to reiterate through a protectionist agenda.
And so why have the government come up with these 4 strands?
So PREVENT, the implementation of PREVENT was around about 2006, although it was formulated in theory from around about 2003. It's on the back of, though not exclusively, responding to things like 9/11, certainly 7/7, when we had instances of suicide attacks which were domesticated, meaning that they were carried out by people who were born in Britain and they carried out their atrocities within Britain. So it was a response to that as well.
So did the police feel that having the PREVENT strand, do they feel that having people within the community who could have contacted the police at an earlier time to maybe stop these events from happening, is that the main agenda for PREVENT?
Yep. So as much as PREVENT's called PREVENT, it actually is preemption. It's a strategy or a policy which is trying to affect something that may or may not actualise in the future. Like I say, through identifying at-risk vulnerable individuals.
So at-risk and vulnerable, it's 2 bold statements. What do the police see as a person being vulnerable? What do they look for in or what do they tell volunteers who are helping with the PREVENT policy to look out for in a vulnerable person? So
essentially, to not use the term, I wouldn't say volunteers, but it's been framed as a collective responsibility, so it's everybody's responsibility through society. More latterly, the Counter-Terrorism Security Act 2015 has made it a statutory obligation for professional practitioners to adhere to the PREVENT strategy, or to demonstrate what they've termed due regard. So to go back to your question, what is an at-risk individual or what is a vulnerable individual? Great question, because as much as it is a collective responsibility, the way that the police might understand vulnerability is not necessarily how the health sector might understand vulnerability, and similarly might not necessarily be how education sector understand vulnerability or at risk. So some of my research, for example, has found that has been a particular problem with regard to these kind of definitional inconsistencies. So that's the first point I want to make on that. But you're right, the collective responsibility is meant to be there in theory. If we have a look at the statistics of who now provides reports and referrals, actually for the last 3 years, Home Office statistics suggest that it's the education sector that actually make the most amount of reports and referrals.
So this is teachers?
Teachers, yep. So it could be teachers from primary school, secondary school, further education and or higher education.
So going back, you mentioned your research there, Paul. Can you tell us a little bit more how you've initially got into this area of research looking at Prevent?
Yep, so I've been studying the Prevent policy for almost a decade now. I originally was undertaking a master's thesis, and I was looking at community policing and austerity, bearing in mind this was around about 2010, 2011, and I wanted to look at the pertinent changes that were happening to the police at that time, particularly austerity cuts, pension modifications, etc., which actually historically the police have always been a public institution that had been shielded from that type of government tampering. One chapter of that looked at Prevent, and then from that I identified a research gap, particularly with regard to how Prevent police officers understood their role, how they conceptualised risk, how they conceptualised their roles, and I found out that by doing a bit of reading, we knew almost nothing, knew very, very little about the policing side of Prevent, even though a huge amount of financial resources were directed towards that. So I embarked on a PhD, a qualitative study to understand how Prevent police officers actually understood their roles. It went in a slightly more governance direction and trajectory as the research progressed and the qualitative findings came out. But I also, another point I want to raise is that I looked at a non-priority Prevent area as well, which at the time I could find almost none to virtually no research out there that looked at non-priority Prevent areas.
So how does the government rank areas into non-priority and low priority and high priority?
So formally, government funding or certainly Prevent funding was largely on the back of, and I'm talking here from 2006 to around about 2011, was dictated by Muslim population densities within communities, and you could acquire funding based on that alone. However, with the revised version in 2011, and again bearing in mind this is a changing government as well, moving from New Labour to Coalition, the Prevent strategy got revised and it got, I suppose, carved up. It got separated based on priority versus non-priority areas. These priority areas that emerged, if I'm going to be honest and realistic about this, were not too dissimilar to what the areas were previously. However, if you have a look at how the UK map is, there is no priority areas north of Leeds currently with regard to Prevent.
Right, that's surprising.
Well, yeah, I think it's surprising in the fact, again, if we look at official government statistics, for example, for the last 3 years, we have a look at reports and referrals which are separated by, certain elements of the UK. The North East, other than last year, but prior to that, had the highest report and referral rate outside of London. It slightly went down, if you like, behind the South East, but only by about 14 referrals, so we're still second outside of London. However, even though it's dropped down, in the last 2 years, reports and referrals in the North East have actually doubled, and what we know within the North East is actually it has got a problem, and it has got a large far right footprint in the North East. So 2015, 2016, North East referrals, which again cut across various specified authorities and community driven as well, they were around about, to the best of my knowledge, 773 for those years. 2017, 2018, around about 1,223, so it's almost doubled it within a year.
So Paul, can you see any correlation between the amount of referrals in the North East and why that may be? Why are we seeing more referrals?
Well, it could be the fact that terrorism and policing of terrorism is actually becoming more complex within society when you've got to factor in, as much as it's not the be and end all, it's one extra element to factor in is social media and how prominent that is within society. But I also don't think we should run with the debate that a heightened level of and an increase in referrals and reports necessarily means that counter-radicalisation is done more effectively. With the Counter-Terrorism Security Act making a legal obligation, we also have to be realistic as an objective researcher and have to question and critically question whether or not the Counter-Terrorism Security Act has led to a culture of compliance which might increase reports and referrals. So then we need to break down how effective those reports and referrals are and whether or not they were actually related to PREVENT or whether they were safeguarding more generally, because statistics would suggest there's now around about 70% to 75% of reports and referrals will never make it round the full referral pathway towards channel, and they will be filtered back towards safeguarding rather than being PREVENT related.
So can you give an example where PREVENT has been successful?
Yep, so again there's a slight misconception about what PREVENT might do, and certainly what's considered the arm of PREVENT, which is called channel. So whereas PREVENT is counter-radicalisation, channel is de-radicalisation. It's the final process of the referral process, and it's when somebody has been judged to have surpassed a threshold for radicalisation, so they need de-radicalisation, a bespoke package put in place, and that package will be tailored. It will be bespoke to every individual. There's no one-size-fits-all model.
Seems a lot of work to do that, and obviously a lot of individuals will need to be involved in that.
There is, so it's a multi-agency approach, and again I think one of the misconceptions is that it only entails theological mentoring, so religious mentoring, etc., which is not the case at all. It can be broken down into things like life skills, drug and alcohol awareness, homelessness, so basically things that would centre around citizens' welfare and citizens' development. So a case example would be a far-right wing extremist who had the ideology of the extreme far-right wing as part of their de-radicalisation process actually visited Auschwitz, for example, to kind of understand historically what went on within Auschwitz. So again, it's not just about theological or even ideological mentoring. It can be about citizens' development, and that's what it's there to do, to channel them away from whatever might have kind of pushed them towards that kind of radicalised mindset to begin with.
So where are we with your research now, Paul? So I know you've done a lot of research and you are evaluating if PREVENT is working. Where do you feel this is going? Do you feel that the government may add more strands? Do you feel PREVENT is working in the community? Or do you feel that there should be more work done and maybe training up individuals and volunteers? Or I know I shouldn't call them volunteers, but those who refer.
Mm-hmm. So, like I say, I very much see myself as an objective researcher. My job is to try in the best way that I can to evaluate PREVENT very objectively. Is it working? I think, well, given that it's the world's most extensive counter-radicalisation policy, I think it would be naive to say that it's not working. It's clear examples that it is working. Where do I see the policy going? Personally, again, this is anecdotal, but I thought that the PREVENT policy might have been renamed. It hasn't been. It's currently under government review. Whether that comes out within government review will be something to consider as we move forward in time. Where do I see PREVENT? I think one of the criticisms of PREVENT and one of the broader critiques of PREVENT is that the whole strategy should be scrapped. In my view, that's very blinkered. How do you scrap the world's most extensive counter-radicalisation policy? I think even practitioners would accept that there are elements that can be improved. By their own admission, they would accept that, and they would very much work towards that improvement. I think to say that it can be entirely scrapped would be, again, very naive to say that.
So if you could think of any improvements, what would you say would be a good improvement on what's currently occurring?
So my personal research, again, I've tried to the very best of my ability to remove the emotive side of the research and stay objective. I've personally looked at the governance of PREVENT and how actually what I found out is it isn't necessarily multi-agency in the sense of how multi-agency partnerships work. I found out it was inter-agency, which is some fusion, some melding between organisations and institutions without suggesting that they entirely work harmoniously. You've got to again factor in things like austerity and how much pressure that's putting on these institutions, etc. to, I wouldn't say work in individual silos, but it can be a factor to push them to work even further in individual silos. Personally, I think what needs to happen in the future is I think academics need to work more closely with practitioners. I think there's a gap there, and we need to listen to one another more. So rather than sitting on the sidelines throwing stones, we need primary research whereby people go out there and they work with practitioners. They try and allow practitioners' voices to move from a position of almost invisibility. That is happening now through some very, very good research. So we need those voices to be more thorough. We need to work alongside practitioners as well, to understand from their own admission what is and what isn't working.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about what students on the criminology programme at the University of Sunderland could get involved in regarding Prevent? Because I know you have been working with local police forces in the area, and to roll out this scheme to our current students on the criminology programme. Would you like to talk a bit more about that?
So I met with Northumbria Police around about a year and a half ago now, and with Northumbria Police we've established the first partnership of its kind in the UK, and we've called it the Prevent Partnership Scheme. So that's been established between myself and Northumbria Police. It's on the back of some of my research, looking at governance and looking at the problems associated with that and how we can work more collaboratively. That's a contest aim as well. The revised contest strategy, which came out I believe in June last year, is to instill further collaboration between specified authorities. So we established a scheme where our university students can be trained by myself and a representative from Northumbria Police to deliver presentations on Prevent to specified authorities, thus adhering to the Counter-Terrorism Security Act. But there's benefits for both partnership work between the institution. It's also beneficial for the police, because what we're doing is we're training students to be what we have referred to as experts in the field, so they can deliver that kind of expertise, that knowledge to partners. But also my role as well extends far beyond just teaching now and far beyond just research. I've got a personal responsibility to try and mould our students into citizens who are very employable as well. So it's giving back to our students and it's developing their transferable skills, particularly presenting to varying audiences. Presenting alongside practitioners, so working with the police. Like I say, it's unique to this university. No other students in the UK have this opportunity. It's unique to the University of Sunderland.
Paul, are we expecting any other research coming from you in the near future?
So one of the articles that I've currently written, and it's been through peer-reviewed journal, and I'm hoping it'll be published in the near future, is based on, again, it's an analysis of Prevent. It looks at practitioners' perceptions of counter-radicalisation reporting thresholds. What I found out particularly, and it's based on the back of my PhD research from which I completed in 2015, was that I wanted to have a look at, from Prevent practitioners' perceptions, what is the very point that somebody should report and refer? How do they understand risk at that report and referral stage? What's the threshold that somebody should actually report? And what I found out was, rather than looking at these contextual factors which are outlined via channel, there's a number of different ones, being at a transitional phase of one's life, a sense of belonging, sense of adventure. It wasn't really connected to any of those things. They couched it in terms that it should be connected to a very subjective, own individual gut feeling. So you respond to your gut feeling. If you've got that gut feeling inside, that innate feeling inside that something's wrong, that's the point where you should pass that information on to, whether it be your designated safeguarding lead or the police, for example. Now,
so you're kind of saying it's down to human instinct then? Basically,
it's down to instinct. Now, bearing in mind, I finished my PhD prior to the Counter-Terrorism Security Act. Various campaigns have come out subsequently since then, such as Action Counters Terrorism, which is more generally referred to as ACT, Make Nothing Happen, which have actually supported my findings and actually disseminate the message more broadly across society, that society should be responding to instinct. It's embedded within all the lexicon, all the terminology now, that you should be responding to instinct. So there are some issues with that, don't get me wrong. I feel that in a policing sense, the police maybe find themselves between a rock and a hard place, from trying to shake the historical depiction of Prevent being a spying campaign or a surveillance campaign. And they do need communities, they do need professionals to provide that report. However, everybody's risk feeling inside, everybody's gut feeling is very subjective to them.
Yeah.
So what we don't need are reports and referrals, for example, based on subjective feelings, which might be influenced by the media, for example, which if you look at, and I'll give an example of Charlotte Heath Kelly and Elizabeth Strauss's research in the NHS, they came to the conclusion that actually some practitioners might be underpinning their knowledge of terrorism more generally through media depictions. So if we are moving to that very subjective realm, what needs to happen, in my opinion, is a continuous review of reports and referrals which are now based on very subjective context. Because if we don't do that, you then could go even further in to, say, I won't use the term abuses of power, but maybe poor reports and referrals, which shouldn't have been made in the first instance. So if we have that continuous review, that's got benefits from both for practitioners who work in Prevent and for those who find themselves under Prevent's expanding gaze.
So when will this work be published, Paul? You got a date?
It's gone through its second initial round of review now. I'm just waiting to hear back. I'm hoping within this year. However, like I say, it's based on the back of PhD findings, so it's still, you can find my PhD online, so it's based on that, but I've theoretically analysed it in a slightly different way, and I've submitted that, so fingers crossed, watch this space, hopefully in the near future.
Thanks for joining us, Paul.
Thank you.